Hello there! Welcome to the Saraway channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I hope you're doing well. I'm fighting fit, and I'm overcoming this cold, I think. Hopefully I'll get to the end of it by the end of the week. But anyway, let's continue with our story, and we're on a very exciting part, because Clara is confiding in her best friend Joyce, who lives in the ranch next door to her. They both live on ranches where their husbands look after steers. And she's telling her friend an extraordinary story about being attacked during her sleep with sleep paralysis. But she believes that the hag responsible for being on top of her chest and literally suffocating her is her mother-in-law. But this leads to a rather extraordinary story, which ends up having a Bigfoot connection, which is absolutely extraordinary. So before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with part 3 of our story. I hate to speak ill of the dead, I rarely do, Joyce, but I have to say to you, even on her dying bed, Beryl was as vicious as ever, with only vengefulness and spitefulness on her mind. She never considered for a single second her own grandchildren. As far as she was concerned, they were contaminated with my blood in their veins, and my DNA, so to speak. She was always a distant grandmother towards Nicholas and Lisa. My 2 children never warmed to Beryl like they did to my mother. They sensed only hostility from her. So during their childhoods, they literally distanced themselves from their own grandmother. Nicholas once said to me, "Granny Beryl's not a nice person, Mummy." "Why do you say that?" I asked him. "'Cause she took out your skirt from the washing machine and then got the dog to pee all over it. She then hung it on the line to dry, and she looked very pleased with herself. I think she hates you, Mummy." "Well, dear me, you can't hide much from your children, can you?" said Joyce with a chuckle. "They always notice and observe things, don't they?" "They sure do. But both my children never liked Granny Beryl, not for a second. Anyway, getting back to the deathbed story, one day when me and Carl went to visit her at hospice, she asked my husband to go and get her a glass of water, so I was left alone with her for a few minutes, which was exactly what she wanted. I don't believe she ever did get to drink that glass of water, as she died soon afterwards, later that day. I thought she was going to ask me to take care of her son when she was gone, and to take care of her grandchildren. Not that she showed any interest in them before, but I thought she might just have a change of heart about that. But then again there was none of that. Instead she sat up boldly in her bed, with the last bit of vested strength that she had left in her frail body, and she looked at me straight in the eyes with such hatred. I couldn't believe anyone on their deathbed could be filled with so much venom, but she was, Joyce. "You're happy I'm dying, aren't you, dear? You can't wait to see the back of me." "Don't be ridiculous, Beryl. Where did you get that absurd idea from? Of course I don't want you to die. I know we've never really got along, and I wish things had been different between the 2 of us and we could have put to rights our differences. But there's no way I'd want you to die. You are my husband's mother, I can assure you of that. And when you're no longer here, Carl will miss you so much, as he loves you with all his heart. So his loss, when you're gone, will also be mine." Beryl let out a cruel cackle and waved a warning, rather crooked-looking finger at me. "You're a very good liar, Clara. I'll give you that. Of course you're glad I'm dying. Don't deny it. I promise you, dear. You haven't seen the last of me yet, just so that you know. When I cross over to the other side, I will come back to haunt you. I will make your life so dreadfully miserable that Carl will see you for what you really are. I know in time he will see sense and divorce you, as I will do my damnedest to make bloody sure that happens. I've never liked you, Clara. You were never good enough for my Carl. And if I can destroy your relationship from beyond the grave, I will do it with the greatest of pleasure. See if I don't." "She said that to you on her deathbed?" asked Joy in bewilderment. "I know she was a nasty piece of work, But that is decidedly vicious. Well, she said that. I just can't believe anyone could be so... What is the word I'm looking for, Clara? Cold-hearted, callous, bitter? Yes, that's it. Let's just say the truth is, Joyce, I think that Beryl was a lonely, old, embittered and jealous woman. Carl told me she was always jealous of his girlfriends, and that no matter who he married, no one would have ever been good enough for him, as far as she was concerned. So he told me never to be affronted by her grievances towards me, because it wasn't personal. I believe he was right about that. I believe every girlfriend he ever had was warned off by Beryl, and I guess she scared the bejesus out of most of them. I was the one girlfriend that stood my ground. I wasn't so easily put off by Beryl's threats, because I was so in love with Carl. I guess Beryl would have subjected any woman who had married Carl with the same manner of doggedly hateful abuse. She would have been delighted if her son had remained a bachelor forever. That's what she wanted for Carl. She was incredibly selfish like that. I do know Carl's late father, who was the sweetest, most generous man you could ever hope to meet, really wanted Carl to find a nice woman and to settle down on the ranch with her. But Beryl didn't want to share her son with anyone, least of all me. She wanted him around her permanently, and to never have a life of his own. That's what she'd have liked. I think she couldn't bear for her son's attention to be diverted away from her. She hated that idea. Carl's father really liked me when he was alive, and that made Beryl hate and despise me all the more. It got worse after our children were born. If the truth be told, after I had our children, I thought grandchildren would soften her calloused heart, and that she'd become more accepting of me. But that was wishful thinking on my part. So she didn't soften up at all after the grandchildren were born. I find that absolutely extraordinary. What kind of grandmother behaves like that? She didn't soften up at all, not in the slightest. After Nick was born, she literally marched over to the cot, looked down on the baby and scowled. And she said, "He's an ugly thing, isn't he? He looks just like you, Clara. Now that's a dreadful pity, is it not?" Wow, I'm very sorry, Clara. That is horrible. That must have stung you hard. Besides anything else, your children are gorgeous. Both of them were exceptionally attractive growing up. Going back to your sleep paralysis story, you really believe that your mother-in-law came back from the dead to haunt you? Yes, I do. I know it sounds far-fetched, but I'm telling you, Joyce, I really know it was her. It sounds completely crazy and nonsensical, and I don't expect you to believe me for a single second. But I'm telling you without a shadow of a doubt it was Carl's mother causing me the sleep paralysis. She looked like an old witch, but I knew it was her. I would see her face leering down at me with a vindictive, contemptuous grin. She was really enjoying hurting me. She'd sit on me, hold me down, and let out a loud witch's cackle. Carl would be lying next to me on the bed, and not see or hear a single thing. But when she left my room, in a spiral of black smoke, I would inwardly scream like a banshee, but never audibly, because I didn't want Carl to hear me. After the first scare, he was so dismissive about his mother harassing me from beyond the grave, and I knew telling him such things would only fall on deaf ears. He wouldn't have believed any of it for a second, and would doubtlessly tell me I was having a lucid nightmare. So I take it doesn't happen any more. The sleep paralysis, I mean. The attacks from your mother-in-law. How on earth did you get that to stop, Clara? It did stop, didn't it? Please, for goodness sake, don't tell me it's still going on. Good grief, no, Joyce. I don't think I'd still be around if that was going on. The sleep paralysis stopped years ago. It only continued for a short time. It started the day after Beryl's funeral and went on for 2 weeks and then came to an abrupt and sudden stop. I've never told anyone this before, but some very strange idiosyncratic events occurred that put a stop to the sleep paralysis for good. And I believe, as bizarre as it sounds, I received angelic help from an outer worldly source. You believed you received angelic help? Forgive me if I say this to you, Clara, but that sounds very unlikely to me. But go on. I'm curious about your story. Yes, I do, actually, Joyce. And for goodness sake, stop looking so sceptical. I'd been praying to God to stop the sleep paralysis and to send Beryl to the light. At first it seemed like my prayers were not being answered. But one day something profound happened, something I cannot explain. Me and Carl, we'd been shopping in the local town for groceries. We returned home to find the front door had been torn off its hinges. It was lying in the front yard, completely detached from its frame. Whoever had done that would have to have superhuman strength. I'm sorry, but they would. The door was solidly built. To kick it down, well, you'd have to have been built like the Incredible Hulk. And even Carl said as much. As you can imagine, it gave us quite the shock. You fear the worst, of course, when something like this happens. It would have taken great strength to pull down that door, but someone had clearly done it and snapped the hinges off. With what seemed like an effortless ease, the screws were lying haphazardly across the ground. To say Carl was flustered about this is an understatement. He stared incredulously at the door. He was totally bemused and said, "What the hell has happened here?" We both knew someone had broken into the house. That was beyond dispute. And whoever they were, they must have been pretty determined. I automatically assumed we were going to find the house in absolute chaos, a total scramble, with clothes lying haphazardly all over the floors, spilling out of drawers and so forth. But that's not exactly what we found. I was in an absolute panic because I was worried someone was still in the house and could potentially pounce out of the shadows to attack us. You never told me any of this, Clara. This is one hell of a story. Well, it was not something that Carl wanted us to talk about to anybody. Well, I hope he called the sheriff. No, Carl never did, I'm afraid, said Beryl, shaking her head vigorously. But then again, you know exactly what he's like. He likes to deal with stuff himself. He picked up a pitchfork or something like that, I can't remember exactly what it was, and he entered the house saying that the police had been called, and if anyone was on the premises, they needed to come out now. But no one was there, and this completely confounded and befuddled the both of us. But someone had broken into your house, Clara. The door was lying off its hinges, for goodness sake. Well, of course someone had broken in. That was beyond dispute. But the question was who and why? When we entered the house very gingerly, I might add that our hearts were pounding, at least mine was in my chest. We observed, to our astonishment, what I can only describe as huge muddy footprints that were absolutely gargantuan in size, trailing across the floor, all over the carpets. We couldn't make any sense of it at all, Joyce. And in the beginning we were still feeling affrighted because we still believed there could potentially be an intruder in the house, but we were met with a stiff silence. Carl was, of course, carrying his pitchfork, looking at every nook and cranny, leading the way through the house. But we searched the place and there was nobody there. But there were footsteps all over the house that we couldn't explain. And I promise you, Joyce, I do not know anyone on God's earth that has feet this size. There were muddy marks everywhere, along with a strange woodsy scent in the house. And we had no way of knowing where the strange scent came from. How extraordinary, said Joyce. Had the intruder taken anything of yours, more to the point? That's the weird thing about the story, Joyce. Nothing had been taken, not a single thing of any monetary value. Cupboards and drawers had not been opened. Nothing had been vandalized or disturbed. But then why did somebody even bother to break down the front door if they left with nothing? That is beyond absurd. That's a very good question, Joyce, because it made no sense to me at all. My husband was equally as confounded as I was, especially when we went into our bedroom, because we did see something very strange. There was a large black stone with gold flecks inside it, lying bang in the middle of our bed, that resembled a huge chunk of coal, but it was smooth to the touch, and you didn't get black charcoal on your hands from touching it. For an entire week when I picked up the stone, it would go warm. The stone made me feel incredibly calm every time I touched it. I actually had a dental appointment that week, and I was terrified of the dentist. I always have been. So I took the stone to the surgery with me. I think the dentist found that rather surprising. But that was the best appointment I ever had, because it was so comfortable receiving, that dental therapy without any fear, which I normally would have. There was something so magical about that stone. When you would touch it, it really felt like you were standing out on a brick patio on a searingly hot day in your bare feet, and the bricks were burning the bottom of your feet because of the scorching sun. Only the stone did not burn me, but it was very warm to the touch. It was very peculiar, because it was during the winter. It was a very cold time of year when this happened. So there was no explanation, Joyce, for the stone being so astonishingly warm. I put it in my bed all week. It kept the bed lovely and snug, like a hot water bottle that never ever goes cold. I think when Carl saw that stone lying in the middle of the bed, he was completely bewildered. There are no words to describe how shocked he was, because he felt that stone meant something, but he couldn't understand what it was doing there. We conducted a search around the house, of course we did. We did a total inventory on what might have been taken, but nothing was missing. Yet the house felt incredibly different. And then, of course, there was that very strange black stone lying in the middle of the bed. In what way did the house feel different, Clara, dear? Well, it's hard to describe, really, Joyce, said Clara, making a face. But let's just say a week after Beryl had died, our house became heavy. There was a claustrophobic, dark energy in the house. I know I didn't imagine it. Carl felt it too. If the truth be told, he thought he was the one giving off the dark, negative energy because of the grief he was experiencing over his mother's passing. But it was much more than that, Joyce. So much more than that. The energy in the house, well, it was evil. There's no two ways about it. Very evil. So when you talk about a dark energy, Clara dear, you're talking about an evil energy. I said that, didn't I? It's hard to describe, really, Joyce. But after Beryl's funeral, the energy in our house became hostile and unwelcoming, if you know what I mean. It was like something did not want us in the house. Carl was grieving his mother's death, and that was profoundly apparent. I'd sometimes see him, shedding a few tears. I was personally secretly relieved that Beryl was no longer in our lives. But after she was gone, our house significantly changed in more ways than one. I was being attacked every night by what I believe was an entity that was Carl's mother, with the sleep paralysis attacks. But it was so much more than all that. Let's just say when the attacks on me ended, and the entity, that evil, wretched entity that had entered our bedroom, fled in a spiral of black smoke, there was still a negative energy that remained behind. It never abandoned our house, but clung to the place like a rancid, festering mould that was polluting the air with its repugnant filth. It didn't feel like our sumptuously cosy home anymore. It was as if it had been contaminated by something vile and ugly. There was a dark cloud hanging over everything. I also felt all the time as if I was being watched by menacious eyes. Me and Carl, we'd never fought a day in our lives. And then the bickering started, and we were at each other's throats day and night, like two fighting dogs. It was brutal, Joyce, I'm telling you. Carl has never been unkind a day in his life to me, Joyce. But during that week, he began to spit out pure venom at me, like a poisonous viper. It was almost like he'd become his deceased mother. He'd changed so much that I barely recognized him as my husband. If we'd carried on that way, I don't think our marriage would have lasted for a second. And I don't say that lightly, Joyce. Carl confessed to me that during that week, or those couple of weeks, when we were at each other's throats all the time, he kept hearing a voice in his head saying, "You hate her. You know you do. Go on, strangle her. Put your hands around her throat and squeeze. Be done with her. You don't need her in your life." Goodness gracious me, Clara. It sounds like your mother-in-law was trying to turn Carl against you, and even worse, to do you in, if that's at all possible. How terrifying! I rather think the dark energy in your house was almost certainly your mother-in-law. There is no doubt about it in my mind. Oh, well, there was no doubt in my mind. She was definitely behind the discord in our home. I know she was. Don't forget, Joyce, she promised to haunt me from her grave. And she did just that. Whoever said the dead are completely harmless? If they carry enough hatred in their hearts, maybe they hang around. Maybe they're afraid to cross over. Maybe they do hang around. It's a chilling thought, Clara. Anyway, go on with your story, won't you? Look at me. I'm shaking like a leaf, taking this all in. But I have to remind myself, you're the one that went through this. Oh, it was a dark night of the soul, those couple of weeks for me, Joyce, let me tell you. I kept reassuring myself that my husband's objectionable outbursts were just a consequence of the grief he was feeling over his mother's passing. So I tried desperately to be compassionate and understanding towards him. Carl didn't always agree with his mother. There were times he loathed the way she treated me. The week after Beryl's death was the worst week, let me tell you. The worst week of my married life. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. And let's just say Carl was continuously angry with me. That was the week when the sleep paralysis just got worse and worse. And as I was saying to you, Carl's mother was behind it all. Well, I'm in no doubt you're right about that. Anyway, back to the day of the bizarre break-in, if you can call it that. Me and Carl knew someone had been in the house. We were in no doubt about that. For a start, the front door had been bludgeoned right in, and there were footsteps leading everywhere, mud and grass, leaves everywhere, twigs even. But no cupboards had been opened, as I was saying. The only thing missing, and yes, there was something missing from our house, were a few bananas in the fruit bowl, but that was about it. So whoever broke into our house obviously liked bananas very much, and had a sudden attack of the munchies. Someone broke into your house, deciding to take absolutely nothing, only a few bananas. They leave a black stone in the middle of your bed. How awful that this should happen to you, Clara. I honestly don't know what to say. I couldn't understand it, Joyce. I really couldn't. I knew the house had felt inauspiciously gloomy for the last week or so, but I was beginning to adapt to it, get used to it, if you know what I mean. Because you can, to pretty much anything. When we entered the house, the sun began to shine through the windows. The house looked so pretty, so welcoming and warm. The colours of the decor looked brighter than ever, and even the furniture seemed to gleam, as if it had just been perfectly polished. I should have been very dismayed, extremely disquieted. I know I should have been, Joyce. But instead I felt deliriously happy. It's hard to explain. It was an inexplicable, joyous feeling. Someone had broken into our house, and I was going around the place with a jubilant grin on my face. And even Carl seemed to be in a jovial mood. He said the heaviness in his heart had just lifted miraculously. The only way I can describe it was as if an angel from heaven had been in our house and cast out a demonic stronghold, leaving behind a touch of heaven in its place. I'm not kidding. I know it sounds irrational and it makes absolutely no sense, because when somebody breaks into your house, you feel invaded. You feel as if somebody has intruded on your privacy. But that did not happen to us, Joyce. I mean, after that break-in, the sleep paralysis never came back to me. And that woman, that dreadful hag, that mother-in-law of mine, never came back to torment me again. The bickering between me and my husband just abruptly stopped. It just vanished. Even Carl said, when he returned home that day, and he saw our front door had been ripped off its hinges, he feared the very worst. He thought something quite dreadful had happened. But when he entered the house surreptitiously, he suddenly felt irrationally calm, so incredibly happy, as if all the heaviness in his heart, all his anger towards me had gone, and all his grief and hopeless despair towards his mother's passing had all but floated away like wood smoke on the wind. Goodness gracious me! That is an incredible story, Clara. I just can't believe you've never told me this before. We've known each other for so many years. Why would you keep something like this from me?" "Well, I don't know. I didn't want to talk about it. It's a strange story, isn't it? But it happened, and it happened again, you know."
"What? What are you saying? The door being broken down again, you mean? That happened again?"
Clara chuckled. "That's exactly what I mean, Joyce. The poor door. It had one hell of a beating. But it's our original front door, and we still have it, believe it or not. It's still on our front door to this very day. We came home about 2 weeks later, after a grocery shop in town, and lo and behold, the door was lying on the ground off its hinges again. Me and my husband looked at each other in bewilderment, and Carl said,
"You've got to be kidding me. It's happened again."
This time Carl didn't bother to get a pitchfork from the yard shed. We knew the house would be undisturbed and that no one would be there. And we were right. Nothing was taken. But there were mud marks on the floor, grass and leaves everywhere. And then, predictably, some bananas were missing from the bowl, but in their place were these beautiful tomatoes that I used in a pasta dish. Best tomatoes I've ever tasted.
Goodness gracious me! Are you telling me whoever broke into your house attacked the bowl of bananas and replaced them with tomatoes, and the door was broken down just for a little snack like that?
No, that was not the reason the mysterious intruder broke into our house. It was to retrieve the black stone that they had left on my bed, that I believe was the purpose for the break-in. I believe the stone was left for me to ensure that the evil entity never came back into the house and couldn't come back in some way. And then whoever left me the stone came back to retrieve it again. Maybe they needed it again, I'm not sure, to help somebody else. I'm telling you, I was actually sad to see the back of that black stone. I could have done with it at my next dental appointment, because that didn't go too well, I have to say."
"So are you telling me, Clara, that the break-in that occurred in your home was a visitation from an angel that clearly likes bananas a great deal?"
"Oh, yes, absolutely, Joyce. That's what I really do believe. I mean, how else do you explain this? The angel was very big. He must have been. He had huge feet. But that would make sense, wouldn't it? Because some angels can be as tall as skyscrapers. I think I read that somewhere. It makes perfect sense to me that they would have large feet. I did a lot of research about angels after this happened. I mean, when have you heard, Joyce, of someone breaking into your house, leaving behind such an indescribable, joyful energy? Think about it. Most people, when someone has broken into their space, they feel apprehensive, angry, fearful, disquieted, and everything else besides, and rightly so. But we had none of that. We returned home only to feel lighter and happier than we had been in a long time. How can you possibly explain that? The only negative thing that happened was having to get the door refitted. But beyond that, and of course cleaning up the carpets, but beyond that, it was as if the house had been dusted with angel dust, if there is such a thing, Joyce. And I'm inclined to believe there is."
"Maybe so, Clara. Me personally, I don't know what to make of what you've told me. Why would an angel, I mean, think about this for a moment, trail mud into your house and have an attack of the munchies and eat all those bananas? Angels don't eat, do they? It makes no sense at all to me. Maybe there is some explanation other than this for what happened."
Clara shrugged her shoulders. "Well, I don't know the answer to the question, Joyce, do I? But I believe angels are among us. Sometimes they take on human form. My husband Carl had an experience, you know, that he believes was angelic. He believes he was being tested, and it was a test he badly failed. He's always regretted that, I have to say."
Goodness gracious me, Clara, how many times have I said goodness gracious me today? I've known you for 50 years. We've talked about everything together. And this story that you've shared with me today is utterly extraordinary. It's the most fascinating story I've ever heard, Clara dear. And yet, you unfathomably have only decided to mention all this to me now. Well, I'll say one thing for you. You've certainly got my mind off the worries I have concerning my husband. Because I am very distracted now. And gratefully so. So please tell me what happened in this angelic encounter that Carl claims to have had.
Well, if the truth be told, he's not absolutely sure it was an angelic encounter, but in his gut, he feels it may well have been. He believes God was testing him. He was at the local store picking up some groceries. This man comes up to him. He had messy hair and he looked like a vagabond. He was tall, covered in rags. But he had something radiant about him. He wasn't like your normal beggar, if you know what I mean. There was something different in his demeanour. He came up to my husband, asking for some change. I suppose to buy bread or something. My husband shooed him away at once because he didn't want to be accosted like that. The man seemed to mysteriously vanish. Carl began to search the store for this man, but he couldn't find him anywhere. He wanted to give him some money. He changed his mind about that, and he said to himself, God has just tested me. That was an angel from heaven, and I failed the test. For a long time, Carl was thinking, what if I had given that angel money? Would our lives have been even more blessed? He really believed God was testing him.
So you think it was an angel, do you, Clara?
Well, I don't know, Joyce. I wasn't there, was I? But Carl certainly believes it was, so who am I to doubt him on that?
If the truth be told, Clara, hand on heart, I'm still a little on the fence about whether I believe angels are real or not. But I will say this, your story has definitely given me pause for thought.
Joyce glanced down at her teacup and gasped,
Look, our tea has grown completely cold. Your story was so brilliant, Clara, I forgot to drink the rest of it. I tell you what, how about I put the kettle on again to refresh our cups? After all that talk about angels, and especially the one that broke into your house having an attack of the munchies and raiding your banana bowl, I'm suddenly feeling quite hungry. Fancy some of my coffee cake. I made some a day ago. It's still delicious.
Your cakes are always the best, Joyce. It sounds like a great idea. That would be absolutely lovely. Goodness, we do get sidetracked at times, don't we? Goodness, and you were worrying all about William, and all I've been doing is talking about myself. I feel quite ashamed about that.
Oh, don't be ridiculous, Clara. You do talk some nonsense sometimes. Your story has lifted my spirits exponentially. I feel so much better since you've spoken about all these things. You've made the world a much more mysterious place for me. And I haven't been thinking all about William, which is a huge relief. If the truth be told, Clara, I'm beginning to think I probably have overreacted about my husband. He assured me that his visit to the doctor went extremely well. I'm probably worrying about absolutely nothing. As you say, it was likely his nightmares that made him lose his appetite and his good sense of humour. I'm sure in no time he'll be as right as rain. You're right, we do go through cycles in our lives. Why should I give him a hard time just because he's going through a down period, I suppose?
That's exactly what I've been telling you all along, Joyce. Restless sleep can set you back a couple of weeks, I believe. It's a scientifically proven fact that when our sleep has been disturbed, bouncing back to a healthy normal cycle can take a long time. I want to tell you, when I had that sleep paralysis, I wasn't eating a thing. I was overwrought, frantic, nervous. So yes, if your husband has been having sleepless nights, is it any wonder he's not himself? Who knows what kind of nightmares he's been experiencing? Maybe they have been so dreadful he doesn't want to share them with you, and he's losing sleep over them. We all go through ups and downs in our lives, just like the cycles of nature. I believe human beings are exactly the same, and there are times when we're stripped bare and are emotionally fragile, like the trees in winter. But the great news is the spring always comes back. It's guaranteed to come back, and then everything blossoms. And when you look back on this, you'll think, what was I worrying about? I made a fuss about nothing. Clara was absolutely right.
Well, now that you put it like that, how can I disagree?
So there we are. That is the end of part 3. Part 4 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.